Well, hello, everybody in New Westminster and Burnaby and elsewhere across the country. Welcome to our Town Hall, Facebook Town Hall. Of course, talking about COVID-19 and the pandemic, some of the federal government responses. And today we have a special guest, a good friend, and an extremely hardworking public official, and that's Mayor Mike Hurley from the city of Burnaby. And thanks very much for being with us tonight, Mayor Hurley.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be on here, Peter, and join in with you in conversation and discussions about what we can do better in both the cities.
Absolutely. Now, because it's 7 o'clock, and this has been a tradition now for these town halls, at 7 o'clock across Burnaby and across New Westminster, we're paying tribute to the frontline workers and the frontline healthcare providers, people that have been on the front line now for 6 months and have been making sure that as much as possible our people who have COVID-19 are being taken care of, and often putting themselves in pretty perilous situations. So for 7 o'clock, as people are banging on pots and everything across both New Westminster and Burnaby, we'll add our voices. And thanks very much to frontline workers and healthcare providers, our first responders, everybody in New Westminster, Burnaby, and right across the country that are making sure that people are taken care of during this pandemic. And of course, on behalf of the Parliament of Canada, Jagmeet Singh, our national leader, I hope that everybody who is listening tonight is staying safe and healthy during the pandemic. And of course, we've had many thousands of people who watch these broadcasts as a rerun on our YouTube channel. So if you're watching this the next day or in the coming days, we hope that you and your family and loved ones are staying safe and healthy as well during this pandemic. I wanted to start off before I go to Mayor Hurley to talk about the city of Burnaby and give a brief update to my constituents about what indeed is what we've been fighting for over the course of the summer, and some concerns that I have coming forward. And we'll then go to the city of Burnaby. We'll talk to Mayor Hurley, and we've got a special treat in about 35 minutes, something that you probably haven't seen in our community, but something that Mayor Mike Hurley has done, and it's quite impressive. And then we'll come back for the final few minutes to talk a bit about what Parliament might look like in a few weeks' time. So my work as Member of Parliament and as the House Leader for the NDP, so in a sense I'm the Chief Negotiator for the NDP, has been to push on behalf of our caucus and our leader to make sure that people are being provided for. That's why we fought for the emergency response benefit. We pushed for a commercial rent relief as well for small businesses, to keep as many of the small businesses and nonprofit organizations thriving as much as possible during this pandemic. We also fought for supports for people with disabilities, and all the people with disabilities who are registered at the federal level are receiving later this month a one-time $600 payment as support for the costs that come as a result of this pandemic. We have been pushing for sick leave for everybody in this country, so that all workers will be able to access sick leave, even if they're not in the collective agreement or not part of their workplace now. That is something that Jagmeet Singh felt was extremely important. And we're pushing now for childcare provisions and supports that are put into place. As we know, kids are going back to school, and families need that support for childcare. These are all the things that we have been fighting for and pushing to put into place. And because it's a minority parliament, and because the Liberal government needs the support of the NDP, we've been successful in pushing the government to put in place a lot of the supports that will make a difference. Now, that being said, there are still a lot of holes, and we're fighting to make sure that everybody who needs support is taken care of during this pandemic. We've also been providing supports through my office, and I'll give you my phone number and email at the end of this broadcast so that you can contact us if you need help for any casework issue, anything related to COVID-19 or any other issue where you need the support of your federal MP. So for questions that people may have, we'll have some time after Mayor Hurley talks a bit about the city of Burnaby. So any questions you have tonight, as we've done with other broadcasts, just feel free to put them out on Facebook. You can make those comments, and we will be more than willing to answer what we can. So I'm going to turn things over now to Mayor Mike Hurley. He's been a longtime friend and has been an incredibly hardworking mayor for the city of Burnaby. Started right off. It's coming up to a 2-year anniversary now in a few weeks' time, and he has just been constant. I don't think he sleeps. He's just been focused on making sure folks in the city of Burnaby are getting the supports that they need. Mayor Hurley, can you talk a bit about where the city is at now and what you see as something that's impressed you the most coming through this pandemic, but also some of the challenges that the city of Burnaby faces as we move into what could well be a second wave this fall for the COVID-19 pandemic?
Absolutely, Peter, and it's concerning for us all. But before I start to talk, I would just like to acknowledge that I'm sitting here in the mayor's office on the unceded traditional territories of the Hunkaminam, Squamish-speaking people, and to give appreciation for being able to share these territories. And I also want to give a shout out to our workforce here at the city. All our truck drivers, our people who pick up garbage or recycling, the people that come to work every day in our building department and our parks. Through the stress of this whole thing, they have just been outstanding. And, they have made a real difference. And as we have seen all through this pandemic, the people who really make the difference are the people who put on their boots, strap on their shoes, and go to work every day. And in my mind, those are the ones we should be looking after when we're targeting help for people in our communities. Those are the people that we should be looking after first. So, and that goes right through the spectrum of out there, even people who don't work for the city of Burnaby, grocery store workers, people who deliver groceries from all over the country. Those are the people who have really pulled us through this situation. And I don't think we should ever lose sight of that. And sure enough, as soon as we go back to some form of normality, all those people will get forgotten again, and the bankers and other people will show up and become the stars of our communities again. But the real stars of our community are the people who go to work every day. And so hopefully that's something that doesn't get forgotten when all this is over. Just within the city of Burnaby, we have opened most of our facilities again, albeit in a different way. Our community centers are open, but by appointment only. And we're doing this in a way that we can protect people while we try to bring back different parts of our city towards a more normal relationship. But so our facilities, I'll give you an example of how this has affected us. In a normal exercise class in a community center, we would have 90 people in the room. So right now we can have a maximum of 15. So you can see right there that while the federal government and the provincial government encourages us to get back to opening our facilities, there's really a big hole that happens because we're not bringing in the revenue that we need to really justify having those places open. We've chosen to open them because people do need that. And we believe that our seniors, although our senior centers aren't quite open yet, but our everyday people really need to have something that they can get out to, and that they can get to their exercise classes, that they can get to their swimming classes, and start to get back into some kind of normal life. So we have
So
taken that on.
Can I ask you about the senior center then? The senior centers, this is something that you're seeing potentially to open in the fairly short term?
I know the senior centers will be, unfortunately, that's the most high risk community.
Yeah.
So the leadership within the senior center is really reluctant to open those doors again, although there are some seniors who are really feeling that and who are needing, that community involvement. And unfortunately, they're the ones that are most affected because they're being stuck at home. And quite frankly, some seniors are really struggling with it all. But we have an obligation, I think, to keep them as safe as possible.
Yes.
And opening senior centers at this time, it's just not a smart thing to do. And, we go through this every day at our emergency operations center, which has been operating every day for 6 months now. And we go through it step by step every day, what we should be doing next, what we can open safely, what we can do in a reasonable timeline. And we are trying to start some things for seniors, but in the outdoor areas, where, it's a bit safer, because we do know there are some seniors who really want to get back to doing some of these activities like guitar lessons and those types of things. So we are trying to accommodate some of that, but we just don't feel like we're ready to take them indoors yet and expose that kind of risk. So, our outdoor swimming pools, we're keeping them open for an extra week because they've been very popular during the summer months. And with the weather being so good, we have decided to keep them open for some extra time. And it also gives us time to get our indoor swimming pools ready to be up and running within about a week's time. But again, they will open, but in a very limited capacity and a very controlled capacity, so that we can ensure that we're keeping everyone as safe as possible. I mean, it's always a challenge, and we really go through a lot of work at our emergency operations center to ensure we're getting it as close to right as we possibly can. So credit to our staff who have really put a lot of work into trying to keep our community safe while trying to open up again. And it's a difficult balance.
Yes. Yeah. Now, so for any facilities that are opening, that would work on a reservation service. Is that the way to ensure that the social distancing is in place and that people can remain healthy by using these facilities? As Burnaby has an extensive network.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything is done by booking. There's no walk-ins because we just can't manage that. It's too difficult. But we are about 40% capacity, I believe, in our community centers. Our outdoor pools have been a big hit, and they're, I believe, about 80% capacity. And we're expecting a good turnout when we open our indoor pools as well. But again, people, they won't be able to use the change rooms. They'll have to come dressed, and they'll have to leave right away as soon as they're finished. And they'll be allowed to stay in for a limited amount of time. So we are trying our best to get things back, but in the most responsible way we possibly can.
So Mayor Hurley, what's the biggest challenge that you see the city of Burnaby facing in the coming months? We're assuming that there won't be a vaccine available for many months yet. Hopefully at some point early next year. So what are the challenges that you see with Burnaby bridging that gap over the next few months and the challenges that the city is facing?
Well, the many challenges, I mean, one of the big ones we're going to face is the homeless issue. And, we're hoping to have an emergency center up and running before too long here in conjunction with our provincial government so that we can keep a handle on the homeless population and ensure that COVID doesn't get too big a hold in that community. And to ensure that we do that, we have to keep them in an area where they can be monitored and somewhat knowing where they are. So we're hoping to have an emergency center up and running very soon to get us through the winter months. Our warming centers will likely not be able to operate because they just don't have the space to accommodate, the numbers. We were able to accommodate 40 people in an ice rink. So our warming centers are very small. So we're trying to work through that, working together with BC Housing and how we can best prepare for that situation that's coming up. And I think we're close to having some answers. Is it going to be enough? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's ever enough, but we could sure use some help from the federal government.
Yes.
When it comes to the homeless issue, when it comes to the massive problems we're having with overdoses in the city. We just see that continuing to grow. And we really need, obviously we don't have the staff, and we don't have the expertise in dealing with mental health issues and the overdose issues and the drug related issues that there are in the city. So the federal government really needs to start stepping up to the plate to do what they're supposed to be doing to look after our most vulnerable in society. We're doing our bit, but we need help from the other levels of government as well.
Yes, and as I think we've all become aware in British Columbia, Jenny Kwan, who basically did an order paper question, found out that the amount of money that the federal government is spending in British Columbia is less than 1% on housing, and yet this province is really at the epicenter of the housing affordability crisis that we're seeing right across the country. So we have been pushing, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP caucus. We are going to be pushing for substantial investments in housing. There's since the former Liberal government actually eliminated the National Housing Program, we have seen a crisis in housing affordability, not just in Burnaby and in New Westminster, but right across this country. So your point is well taken, and I should mention to folks who are watching that Mayor Hurley went to the Finance Committee in Ottawa this summer and very eloquently put the case for investing in affordable housing right across this country. Himself and Jonathan Cote, who were the two mayors invited to present at the Finance Committee. And thank you for doing that, Mayor Hurley. It made a huge difference, I think, in at least people understanding the problem. So what is the biggest thing that you've seen over the last few months in Burnaby that has impressed you about the response during the pandemic, from anything that you've seen that just has surprised you in a positive way? We talk about the pandemic and the negative impacts and the challenges, but what's the most positive thing you've seen?
Well, it's been how the communities pulled together, different groups throughout the city, from our Sikh community to our Italian communities, to all the different groups that have pulled together to put food on people's tables. And, food security has really been a huge issue throughout this pandemic. And it has been for many seniors too, who couldn't leave their homes, and people got together, including our staff here at the city, who provided over 5,600 meals during this time to seniors who couldn't leave their homes. So we've seen a great coming together of our community. We've seen the grit of the community, and standing up and saying, we're going to work together, and we're going to get through this, really acting very strongly. So I've been so proud of the different groups. Too many to mention if I get into it, and I'll forget someone, and that's never a good thing. But it's just been tremendous to see the way our community has really pulled together throughout this to help others, to recognize the need, and to find a way to get out there and fill the gaps that are needed. And that's been done in spades here in Burnaby.
I'm on a Facebook town hall with Mayor Mike Hurley of the city of Burnaby. Just wanted to wish a welcome to folks that are watching tonight, and people will be watching, of course, in reruns in the coming days. So a big shout out to Nancy, to Zenny, to Lori, to Becky, to Margaret as well, to Hannah, to John, everybody who is tuning in tonight, and we've got a number of questions that have come up. A number of the questions deal with disability issues, and because Mike Hurley's time is short this evening, I'll come back to the disability issues after he has to sign off for tonight. He'll have to sign off in about 15 minutes or so. And so I'll come back to the disability issues that people are asking, and thank you very much for putting those questions on the Facebook Live Town Hall. There is a question from Becky, which is about affordable housing for low-income people, and I know this is a problem in the city of Burnaby and right across the country. Mike, what's your sense in terms of affordable housing for lower income people? What would the city of Burnaby like to see the senior levels of government doing so that the John Horgan government and BC has certainly built more affordable housing units than the rest of the country combined in the last 2 years? That's a wonderful thing. But what would you like to see more of from the federal government so that housing in Burnaby is affordable?
Well, I think, we have been in touch with everybody in government throughout the country, anyone we could speak to about what we're trying to do here in the city. And we've put up 6 sites, put it out there to be done for affordable housing that could produce 1,350 units. Tomorrow, we have put it through the zoning process. We're ready to go we have done our piece. We have just asked the senior levels of government to please come and fund these so that we can get them in the ground. But unfortunately, although the federal government keeps announcing billions and billions of dollars for housing, trying to actually get any of that money to start building is really a challenge. I mean, the amount of paperwork that has to go in, the amount of you have to tick every little box that they put in front of you absolutely correctly. And it takes a long time to wade through the paperwork. So my thing to the Prime Minister when I talked to him was, let's get rid of all this red tape. Let's get rid of all these barriers to housing. If the 3 levels of government agree that these are good projects, let's just do it. I mean, we're all going to be here. We're not going to fool each other and not build the housing. We all say we want to build housing. Words are easy, but we need some action. And we have done our part to put the land in place to lease for affordable housing. And that can be done really quickly. But we need the funding especially from the federal government. And that funding is just proven to be very difficult to get our hands on.
These sites are ready to go.
Yes.
Right. If you had the money to get the housing in place, you'd be able to build hundreds of units of affordable housing. The sites are already zoned that way. They're already available to the federal government to do that. 1,350
units, and we could start them all. We got shovels in the ground by the end of the year. If someone would step up and fund them.
And one of the things I'm critical of the government in Ottawa often. I think sometimes they do the right thing. In the case of housing, clearly not. Over the 5 years that we've seen since Mr. Trudeau was first elected in 2015, we've seen a grand total of 14,000 affordable housing units built by the federal government across the country, and that includes units that are not yet completed but have been basically started. So the billions of dollars that are being announced tend to be more for show than they are in actually making sure that somebody has a roof to sleep under and can actually feel like they can set down roots in Burnaby or in a city that they live in. And the fact that you're talking very eloquently, Mike, about 1,350 units that are ready to go. The federal government just has to step up, and instead of talking about funding housing, actually fund housing. That's a very important point that you make.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and then Peter, they have another program too, where they would put some federal land up for housing. And as far as I can see, and this has been talked about for years too, certainly in British Columbia, not one piece of federal land has been put forward to go towards housing. And they have lots of land around our province. They have lots of land across the country that could be used too. So that program, although they announced it, hasn't actually produced anything.
Yeah, and that's to the detriment of people in this community and elsewhere across the country. We only have a few minutes left with you, and I wanted to talk about the issue of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. As you're aware, there are people who are currently protesting Mr. Trudeau's pipeline, and they have put themselves in harm's way. They're basically up in the trees in the Burnett Creek River Basin. Those are the trees that would be removed by Trans Mountain coming through. And the NDP has, myself and Laurel Collins, who's the environment critic, we've asked the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer to revise and give Canadians a sense of what the overall cost of Trans Mountain would be. It looks like the cost of $12.5 billion, this is paid for by public funds, has increased dramatically since the pandemic began. So in a few weeks' time, we'll certainly be able to share that with the community. But that plus the purchase cost of Trans Mountain is somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 billion. I know you were in opposition to Trans Mountain, and the courts there's been contests in the courts. The courts have said that the government's followed procedures. Whether or not this is actually in the public interest is a whole different question. What are your thoughts about Trans Mountain, and what are your concerns about the fact that this taxpayer outlay, nearly $20 billion, will actually serve just to export raw bitumen and, of course, can fuel the climate crisis?
Well, there's so many things about this project that are just wrong, including the cost, which is being borne by taxpayers. But the main concern for us in Burnaby, you have two concerns: of the environmental issues, and I'll come back to the people that are up in the trees. I went down to visit them there last Sunday. But the overarching real issue in Burnaby is the safety. Burnaby is where the pipeline comes to an end. It's where it's stored. So Burnaby is taking on all the risk for what's viewed as in the best interest of Canada. I'm not sure that that's true, but in some people's mind, they believe that's true. But Burnaby is taking on all the risk. And I don't think it's being recognized that, when you double the number of tanks in that tank farm, when you put them so close together that it almost be impossible to fight any kind of fire that happens there. Not to mention the terrain it's on, and it's, we have a university right above it. We have people in an elementary school right beside it. And I know some people have been saying, well, they knew that when they built it, there was a tank farm there. That is true. And that was in the 50s and 60s. But we know a lot more now than we did then. And, in the 50s and 60s, we also thought that asbestos was a good thing. And we didn't double down on asbestos. At least now we don't double down on asbestos. We did for a number of years. But so doubling down on a mistake that was made in the 50s can't be justified today. And I just think this project is wrong in so many levels. In Burnaby, we don't support it, and we never have supported. And we think it's wrong for our community.
And that's a very important point that you're making, Mike. I visited as well. Visited a couple of times the folks who are in the Burnett Creek. In fact, I brought them a bottle of Speaker Scotch from the House of Commons, because what they're doing is really in Canada's interest. You're correct in pointing out that the issue of safety is something that is very relevant to Burnaby and relevant for the Salish Sea. The reality is that increase in tanker traffic will have a profound negative impact on the wildlife in the Salish Sea. There just doesn't seem to be much of a reason to spend such a vast amount of taxpayers' dollars on a project that simply isn't going to be in Canada's interest, and certainly not in the interests of the community. So thank you for that. We've got just a few minutes to go, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity for any other message that you wanted to give to people in the city of Burnaby, and we'll let you out because we know we've got another meeting starting in a few minutes for you. So is there any concluding remarks before we put on the video that we promised at the beginning of the show? Anything that you want to share with people in Burnaby? And then after that, I'll ask you to introduce the video.
Yeah, well, first of all, I do want to give a shout out to the people, as you talked about, who are up protesting in the trees. And, you know, obviously they have a very strong belief that this project is wrong. And so anytime that people have that much conviction and are doing it in a peaceful manner, as should be done, then I think, you know, we have to recognize and support their efforts on all our behalves. But, you know, speaking of that, of course, we have this climate change issue that we still have to deal with. And, you know, I think this is an important project that we all need to get on with. And here in the city, we have declared an emergency, a climate emergency, and we are very determined to meet those targets which we have set, to meet and exceed those targets that we have set. Now, one of the ways that we know we're going to have a real strong biking, cycling, walking paths within the city, active transportation that will give people the opportunity to leave their vehicles at home. But to do that, we have to provide a safe and a spine here in Burnaby. And we're planning on doing that, you know, along Burnaby Lake in conjunction with Metro Vancouver, all the way from New Westminster, and join that path up all the way downtown. And that's a plan that's in place. And part of that plan for us here in Burnaby to complete that spine that we must build is an overpass, pedestrian biking overpass, at least one over the highway roughly at Spurling, where we can connect Deer Lake, Burnaby Lake, and allow people to get out and enjoy the great parks we have here in our city. We have seen during this pandemic the overwhelming need for park space and the overwhelming need for people to get outside and be healthy and to be with their families. And we think, I believe, that need is going to grow more and more and more. And certainly that's going to be one of the big focuses for me here in the city. And I know our council is on the same page that we have to go down this road. And we're going to start ensuring that people can get out and enjoy all our parks. And we're going to try and connect as much as we possibly can throughout our city.
Yeah, and I kudos to you for that vision, Mayor Hurley, because I know as a biker going across Burnaby that going across the freeway overpass right now from Deer Lake to Burnaby Lake is pretty daunting, dangerous. You got trucks right beside you, and having a pedestrian bike bridge that would unite the two lakes would make a big difference for quality of biking and walking in our city, and the green space would be connected up in that way. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. We deeply appreciate, we've had a lot of questions that are coming in, and I mentioned earlier for this live town hall, I'll be coming back to the disability issues because I've had a number of questions around disability and the disability tax credit, so I'll come back to that. But first, I'm going to ask Mayor Hurley just to introduce the video that we will play, and then he will step out and I will come back with more information on the disability tax credit and the disability emergency benefit.
Well, this is a video that was put together with our staff, and Joe Keithley wrote this song, and we performed it together, and it's an anti-racism song. You will find a very strong message in there about the importance of community. And you will see a view of City Hall that you haven't seen before, with all our staff, or many of our staff, surrounding City Hall, connected by a rope that had gone all the way around City Hall to ensure that everyone knows that we're all working together to have a better society. So I think it's a great song written by Joe, and we had a lot of fun doing it.
Thanks very much for being with us, Mayor Mike Hurley of the City of Burnaby. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me on, Peter.
People in our town, such strength and love, they're solid and strong. We told people in my picture and life, 'cause we're all the same. I'll defend that all my life. But when you face a storm, you won't stand alone. We'll all stand together, 'cause this is our home. And it don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate. So you won't stand alone. No, you won't stand alone. Together, the human family, we're trying our best to be happy and free. So let's keep our faith in one another, 'cause that's our strength, our sisters and our brothers. When you face a storm, you won't stand alone. We'll all stand together, 'cause this is our home. And it don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate. So you won't stand alone. When you face a storm, you won't stand alone. We'll all stand together, 'cause this is our home. And it don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate. So you won't stand alone. You won't stand alone.
Wow, awesome. That's absolutely terrific. Well, thanks again for being with us, Mayor Mike Hurley. Thanks very much. Now, I mentioned earlier, and I'd like to wish a welcome to, and thanks for the compliments around the video. Compliments coming your way on Facebook. Lots of hearts and lots of thumbs up, Mike. So despite the technical issues, they like the video. Thanks to Jonas. Thanks to B very much, Richard as well, Bob, Kareem, Scott. Thanks to Kevin as well. We've had a lot of people that have come on tonight, and a number of questions about the disability tax credit and what happened with that. In fact, I had questions from John about the last town hall just before the summer in July, where I talked about the government had said at that point that eventually people with disabilities would be receiving that supports in the month of July. Now, what that did not come about, and what we basically fought for was to expand beyond the disability tax credit, the benefit that was going for people with disabilities. So the government said, if you have a disability tax credit, then you get an emergency benefit for people with disabilities. The problem is, of course, most people with disabilities don't receive the disability tax credit for a number of reasons. First off, it tends to be for those people with disabilities who have an income, and otherwise it doesn't make sense to go through the process. Often you have to pay your doctor to actually get the disability tax credit. So we fought to expand that to all people with disabilities, and we found out just a few weeks ago, the federal government has actually never done an inventory of people with disabilities who receive provincial benefits for people with disabilities but don't receive federal benefits. So we are pushing the government now to negotiate with the provinces so that there can be a disability benefit that goes to people with disabilities that are only registered provincially. But at the same time, this month, there will be that one-time payment of $600 for people with disabilities at the federal level. So I completely agree with people who say that this has been far too long. It is disrespectful for people with disabilities. Coming out of the disability movement, being the former the executive director of the Western Institute for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and working with deaf, deafened, and hard of hearing people in British Columbia, I feel profoundly that the federal government has a responsibility to provide supports to everybody with a disability. That means they now have to make sure that everybody is registered as a person with a disability, whether they're getting provincial benefits or federal benefits, whether they're registered provincially or registered federally. So I understand the frustration, and I think what the government has done is not adequate for people with disabilities, and we're going to continue to push so that there are supports, emergency supports for everybody with disability in this country. People with disabilities have been the most hard hit in many respects during this pandemic, and as we know, about half of the people who have to go to a food bank to make ends meet, and half of the homeless in this country are people with disabilities. So it's time that we shifted and made a difference in the kinds of supports that we're providing to people in this society. That's why I'm supportive of Leah Gazan, who is an NDP MP, who's tabled a motion 46, that calls for a universal basic income in this country. I'm one of the seconders of that motion. And I also believe that what we need to do is put into place a fair tax system to make sure that we can pay for all of these things. Currently, about $25 billion a year go to offshore tax havens. Canada, unlike countries like Norway and Switzerland, does not have a wealth tax. So if you're extraordinarily wealthy, you don't pay taxes on that. And particularly through this pandemic, we've seen a tremendous amount of profiteering. The banking sector has gotten hundreds of billions of dollars in liquidity supports. They've made billions of dollars in profits. We've seen Amazon increase its wealth and its supports by nearly $80 billion. And the owner of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, is now the wealthiest person on this planet. And yet, Amazon and other web giants like Facebook and and Google and other companies like that pay very, very little income tax. So, as finance critic, what I've been pushing for is to put in place a fair tax system where people are paying those that benefit the most from being in society, the highest companies with the most profit, the wealthiest people, pay their fair share of taxes, which allows us to provide the supports to everybody else. And the important lesson that we learned in the Second World War was this: In the Second World War, there was a feeling that everybody was in it together. Profiteering was actually banned. You couldn't profit from the Second World War. And the tax structure was put into place, was a fair tax structure. So the more income you earned, if you were very, very wealthy, you actually paid more taxes than somebody who was middle class or somebody who was poor. That's not the case today. And in fact, many people anecdotally talk about situations where a secretary who's getting by at barely more than minimum wage will pay more in income taxes than their chief executive person, the CEO that they serve, because the CEO can use a wide variety of tax loopholes and can take their money overseas. So we are pushing for the kind of smart, balanced approach that actually make a difference in how Canada provides support to the most underprivileged amongst us, and make sure that we build the kind of society where everybody matters and where nobody is left behind. Scott mentioned the question of the UBI in the survey that was put out. As I mentioned, I'm supportive of motion 46, and we're going to continue to push for the idea that supports go to everybody who needs them. And Jagmeet Singh was the most articulate spokesperson of all. When the beginning of this pandemic, he said, we need a universal support, emergency supports to everybody who actually needs support. And that statement and that vision, coupled with NDP pressure, with our 24 members, we're a small caucus, but we're a mighty caucus in many respects, and we pushed the government to actually put in place an emergency benefit program. I just want to answer a few more questions before we wrap things up. We've got a few more minutes tonight. And so if you've got a question that you want to put in, this is the time to do it. And I'm just going to quickly check through the questions that are coming through on Facebook. Nancy asks about home support, and that is something that I think you can contact our office about. I'm going to give the number and the email just before we terminate the broadcast tonight. And so for home support or any type of casework question like that, it's always best to be directly in contact with us. We've got a really dynamic team. Doris and Elodie and Ravina do amazing work here in New Westminster Burnaby. And of course, we've got the team in Ottawa as well, Munia and Huron, who do a great job. Thank you for your compliments. Thank you, Margaret, for compliments around the work in the community. The work that we're doing is the work that we're paid to do. Our constituents are our bosses, and that's why we work so hard to try to make sure that we're helping everybody through this pandemic. We have helped more than 1,000 people, which is much higher than we normally get in a given year. Because the need has been great. We have been doubling and tripling our work to make sure that we're taking care of as many people as possible. And I just am quickly looking through to see if there are any other questions that have not been answered. I'm shouting out to the New Westminster District Labour Council, who has apparently joined us as well. Thank you very much for the work that you do, and happy belated Labour Day. That was last Monday. Leanne mentions people with disabilities that don't have the disability tax credit are still living under the poverty line. Couldn't agree with you more, Leanne. We really have to make sure that we are putting in place supports that help every Canadian, and we need to build a society where everybody matters and where nobody is left behind. I mentioned earlier leaving phone number and the email, and hopefully that's coming across nicely. 604-775-5707 is our phone number, 604-775-5707. The email address is peter.julian.c1@parl.gc.ca. Again, that's peter.julian.c1 at Parl, PARL.gc.ca. Let us know if there's anything that we can help you with. Make sure that that we can provide the supports or provide information. We don't have a magic wand, and that doesn't mean that simply calling our office makes everything work. But we do the best we can to fight hard on your behalf, because that is my job as Member of Parliament, and that's the job of our team as well. So I'd like to thank Mayor Mike Hurley for coming out tonight. I'd like to thank my team, Doris and Aladi, for their technical support, which is not always easy because I sometimes push the wrong buttons. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching tonight. This will be available on the YouTube channel as well. So in the coming days, you can watch it. If you need any further information, contact my office. And for now, be kind and keep safe and keep healthy during this pandemic. Next Thursday, we have our next Facebook Live Town Hall. That'll be at 7 p.m., just double checking, with Mayor Jonathan Cote, the City of New Westminster. And so hope that you'll join us next Thursday night. Keep safe and keep healthy. Good night.